Hey, what's going on, guys? This is AndrewChicken, and welcome back to another video. Out of all 26 heroes in Deadlock, which one has the worst weapon build in the entire game? Well, that's actually a rather difficult question to answer, because most characters actually have the ability to make a weapon build if they so choose. There are tons of great examples of powerful weapon users. For example, we have Haze, one of the best gun characters in the game, with multiple abilities dedicated to amping up her weapon damage. She has Fixation, and of course she has Bullet Dance. Both of these are just huge gun-dealing powerhouses. We also have characters like Wraith, McGinnis, Bebop, Calico, who are known for having vicious gun builds. But there are also some characters who are lesser known for dealing gun damage, like, for example, Lash. So the question is, which of these characters is the worst of them all when it comes to building for their weapon? So before we get started, I want you to comment down below who you think has the worst gun build in Deadlock, and also, if you've been enjoying the content recently, make sure that you're subscribed, because it really helps boost my videos in the algorithm. It helps you stay caught up on all the videos that I release, and it just makes me really happy. I like seeing that number go up. I hate seeing it go down, so please do me a favor and subscribe. So first of all, what is a gun build? We need to make sure we define what we're talking about before we determine who has the worst gun build. A gun build is a build where you're focusing on stacking up mostly weapon items, and the items in your other categories, the Vitality and Spirit categories, are focused on supporting your gun. You buy things like Combat Barrier that provide you weapon damage while shielded, Fortitude, which provides you weapon damage while you're above a certain health threshold, you buy Quicksilver Reload to give you more ammo on an ability, and Bullet Resist Shredder to reduce their bullet resistance. And in general, by the time you get to the late game, your item spread is going to look something like this, where most of your item slots are filled out by the weapon category with very few purple and green items. So to answer that question, we need to identify a few different factors that go into making a good gun setup. And the perfect example of a great gun build is Haze, because she has a great combination of two key factors. She has an excellent weapon. This is a fast-firing, nearly hit-scan SMG, and it also has the added benefit of its ammo count scaling with spirit power. So she has two ways to buff up the max ammo, meaning that she gets pretty good consistency on this weapon. Sure, in the early game, she's going to be reloading a lot, but in the late game, when you get some items that just passively give you bonus ammo, and you also stack up just a few quick spirit items that give you spirit power, you're going to have plenty of ammo to burst down the enemies with, and the reload time isn't really that long, so you have super good consistency on this. It's just a great weapon. And then also, as I already mentioned, Haze has an entire passive ability dedicated to giving her a ton of weapon damage on her gun. She just stacks up these fixation marks on the enemies, and her weapon damage gradually goes up the longer she hits them. So this is just a perfect gun character, one of the best gun users in the entire game. And most characters in the game actually have some way to boost their weapon damage, even if you don't think of them as necessarily being gun users. For example, let's take a look at Lash. He's a silly little guy. Most people know him for being a toxic nuisance, because he will grapple up into the air super high, death slam you into the ground, and then hit you with that ground strike for a massive wallop of spirit damage. He can take away half your health with one ground strike. It's insane. But a lesser known fact about Lash is he also has ways to amplify his weapon in the form of his grapple ability. If you upgrade this to the tier 2 upgrade, you get plus 6 weapon damage for 10 seconds. This is a base weapon damage increase that makes his weapon a lot more powerful. And if we upgrade it to the tier 3 version, we get a 20% fire rate bonus to the weapon. So both of those upgrades will allow a theoretical gun Lash user to grapple into the sky and then just start blasting. And so you can potentially build a reasonable gun build on Lash, especially because he also has a reasonably consistent weapon. It is a burst-firing weapon that has pretty good consistency, pretty good ammo consumption. It's got solid stats all around. So Lash certainly is not the worst gun build in the game, even though he is definitely not a conventional gun user as you would picture someone like Haze or Wraith. And even if a character doesn't necessarily have anything that boosts their weapon power in their abilities, they usually have something that just boosts boosts their general damage to make them stronger and theoretically a decent gun user. For example, Lady Geist. First of all, she does actually have something that gives her more weapon power. After using her ultimate, she gains 40% fire rate for 8 seconds, so that buffs up her gun. But also, the Malice is an ability with extreme consistency that gives her a 15% damage amplifier against the target per stack. And so we can shoot them to see, oh, we're doing 22, 23 damage, okay. Put the Malice on him, now we're doing 26, put another Malice, now we're doing 29, 30, and so that can amp us up and actually make a Geist a rather scary gun user. So there are almost no characters in the game that lack an ability to amplify their weapon damage in some way, shape, or form. Even if they're not a conventional gun user like Lash, they still have theoretical gun builds that would synergize with their abilities. So the next variable that we need to look at is what weapon the characters are actually using. Because like I said earlier, Haze has one of the best weapons you could possibly ask for if you're looking for a gun build. It has a fast fire rate, it's super consistent, it's just really solid across the board. But there are a multitude of weapon types in this game, and it definitely plays a role in how effective your gun build is going to be. Obviously, we have fast firing guns like what Haze and Wraith have that are almost hit scan, they're effectively hit scan, and they just have super good consistency. They're easy to use, they put a lot of constant pressure on the enemies, the range drop-off isn't that terrible, and yeah, they're just really consistent, arguably the best guns you could ask for when making a gun build. Then we have burst fire weapons, which are very similar, but fire multiple projectiles in a burst, and then there's a delay before they can fire the next shot. So, very similar, almost identical, hardly a distinction to be made. Then we have pistols like what Holiday, Mirage, and Lady Geist have, and these do provide pretty solid accuracy, pretty good ranged pokes still if you hit your shots accurately, but they are a bit more punishing and a bit less consistent than those faster fire rates because if you miss a shot, there's more downtime before you're able to hit that next shot. And so for stuff like Denying Souls, it hurts, but also just for keeping consistent pressure on the enemies, it's not going to be as consistent. You got to be more precise, but they can still be very powerful gun builds, and obviously we have builds like Gun Holiday, which are still pretty good. Then after that, we have another fast-firing weapon. However, this weapon comes with a downside. It's a projectile. There is a travel time before the projectile hits the target, meaning that you're going to need to lead your shots. And so at longer ranges, these weapons are more inconsistent because, well, you're going to be missing more shots. The enemies are going to run away from your bullets, and so you're definitely going to need to build for some bullet velocity, but these weapons can still be decent overall. It just comes with more of a penalty than something that's pseudo-hit scan. And finally, we have shotguns, which I would argue are kind of the black sheep of the weapons in this game, because they have a very slow fire rate compared to most other weapons. And they also have a bullet spread like this, which means that at longer ranges, they are the most inconsistent weapons in the game, because not only do you have inherent weapon drop-off from your bullets doing less damage the farther away you are, but some of those pellets are just going to outright miss the target. And so it's even more difficult to do damage at range. You do have to get up close. These can pack a punch up close, but they still have that slow fire rate to contend with, and I would argue are some of the worst weapons in the game for just pure gun builds. Imagine if Haze had a shotgun. Oh, that would be just really weird. Finally, we have the special weapons, as I call them, which are namely Grey Talon's bow and Magician's wand. They both fire slow projectiles and also have a slow fire rate, meaning that they are very difficult to use compared to normal fast-firing weapons. But they are still very rewarding and can pack a punch, especially in the form of Grey Talon's weapon. So, we have identified the two factors that go into making a weapon build. What type of weapon they have, and what abilities they have to augment the weapon build and make it more powerful. What sort of synergies do they have? And so, to answer who has the worst weapon build in Deadlock, we need to identify who has the worst combination of A, having either weak or no abilities that augment their weapon, and having an inconsistent, poor weapon that just doesn't really scale with gun builds that well. There is also one more quick factor that I'd like to get into before discussing who I think has the worst gun build in Deadlock, and that is, what other utility does the character have outside of their weapon, and how well does that utility scale when they have no items boosting that utility? So let's take a look at Viscous. Viscous doesn't have any upgrades here that would benefit his gun. None of these augment his gun damage, and he has one of the more inconsistent guns in the game. It's a fast fire rate, but it does have that projectile drop-off where you need to lead your shots at longer distances. So, certainly not like shotgun tiers of terrible at long range, but still difficult, although it can be mitigated with pristine emblem. So theoretically, Viscus has one of the worst gun playstyles in the game. However, he still has a ton of utility in his kit that doesn't necessarily need items to succeed. If we just upgrade his abilities here, we find that he has some incredible capabilities. The cube has a 21-second cooldown with no items whatsoever, which, I mean, it's still on the longer side, but the cube itself is phenomenal. Several seconds of pure immortality and also some basic health regen. And then we also have the Puddle Punch, which is a displacement tool. Doesn't need any items to displace enemies successfully, and it's also a movement tool, which allows Viscus to escape fights or engage fights more effectively than a lot of characters who have worse movement abilities. And the Goo Ball, with no items, is still incredible. It gives him a ton of resistances and allows him to stun enemies repeatedly. This is also super good for movement. Again, you can use it to escape fights, which is likely what you're going to be doing with the Goo Ball if you're playing a gun build, or you can use it to instigate fights, combo in fights, cancel certain ultimate abilities. Overall, Viscus has a ton of utility, even if he's not directly building for it, and that definitely helps when you're making a gun build. You want your abilities to feel impactful when you're building for the gun, and so that definitely is a point in Viscus's favor. So, with all of that being said, who has the worst gun build in all of Deadlock? Well, in my humble opinion, the character who has the worst gun build in Deadlock is a character who looks very similar to me, and that is, unfortunately, Kelvin. Unfortunately, Kelvin is quite bad at all of the factors that we identified that go into making a good gun build, so let's break it down. First of all, Kelvin has no way to amp up his weapon damage with his abilities. The Frost Grenade does nothing. The Ice Path is a movement ability that allows him to reposition while shooting. Okay, that's pretty nice. Although, he does move rather slowly while shooting in the Ice Path, although that can be remedied with Fleetfoot, so, you know, it's something. You could say it's maybe on par with the movement of like a Puddle Punch from Viscus in terms of its effectiveness with a gun build. It's really up to you. I would say it's a little clunky, and it doesn't provide any gun buffs either. That's the major thing. The Arctic Beam can't provide any gun buffs because it just flat out replaces his weapon for a brief period of time with this Spirit Damage Beam. That's not a gun build at all. Gun items won't help this in any way, shape, or form. And then finally we have the Arctic Dome, which certainly has a lot of utility, but it doesn't do anything for a gun build apart from just trapping someone in so he and his team can do damage to them. So, that's the first factor, completely failed. Kelvin is one of the rare characters in this game who cannot buff his weapon damage in any way, shape, or form outside of the item store. The second factor is the weapon itself, and Kelvin has a fast-firing, projectile-based weapon. It's the projectile part that really hurts him here, because this makes him much more inconsistent at range when trying to track those fast-moving characters. The projectiles have travel time, and you need to lead those shots very well, or otherwise you're going to be missing a fair few of them. You want to get up close with Kelvin, and when you're up close, you're more vulnerable, and still, having a projectile-based weapon is just not as good as having something that shoots, or that travels faster, like Haze or Wraith's weapons. And then the third factor is the utility of his abilities when you're scaling up gun damage rather than scaling up spirit damage, and this is where Kelvin also falls flat compared to Viscus, in my opinion. The Frost Grenade is a pretty nice ability when you scale it up with Spirit. It allows him to do a burst of damage, and it also allows him to heal himself and other allies in range. But if you're only going for stuff like, you know, Bullet Resist Shredder, Quicksilver Reload, stuff like that, the Frost Grenade isn't going to do that much damage. It's really just a tool to proc those abilities. It doesn't really do anything else. And so this already is lacking utility. The Ice Path, like I said, is a movement ability that can be used in tandem with his gun. However, I would say it's kind of clunky, and it, you know, can certainly be useful in some situations, but it's not really a cube, and I find that there's more utility from the Puddle Punch in terms of being able to traverse the map, get out of sticky situations, displace enemies, stuff like that. The Arctic Beam is totally pointless if you're building for gun. I mean, I guess it applies Bullet Resist Shredder for a little bit, and it does apply a fire rate slow and a max slow, but at that point you're supporting your team, you're not playing a gun build. And without proper scaling of these spirit items, it really just does not have anywhere near the same utility as what Viscus has in his kit. Now, the Dome is the one place where Kelvin has some really serious utility in a gun build, even without buying any items that scale the Frozen Shelter in any way, shape, or form. It provides a lot of healing, it allows him to freeze objectives, and it traps enemies inside with him and his team for him to just destroy them. So that is the one real big point of utility, but in my opinion, overall, Kelvin, when you're not building for it, has less utility than Viscus, and so he ends up taking the bottom spot as the worst gun character in the game. All three of these factors come together to mean that when you build Kelvin for pure gun, it's just not nearly as effective as basically any other gun build in the game. So with all that being said, let me know who you think has the worst gun build in the comment section down below. Do you agree with my analysis that Kelvin is the weakest in the gun department when compared to every other hero, or do you have someone different in mind who really sucks at shooting the enemies? Let me know in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this little thought experiment of mine, then make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe for more Deadlock content from me. And with all that being said, thank you guys for watching. I will see you all next time. Peace out.